I used to believe that silence meant stability, that if a house was quiet, then nothing was broken. That belief followed me for decades. It shaped how I worked, how I loved, how I raised my son. I am 45 years old, and most people would say my life makes sense. I have a steady job, a home in the suburbs, a marriage that looks intact from the outside. Order has always mattered to me. Structure, predictability. Chaos felt dangerous. Emotion felt unreliable. So I learned early to keep things controlled. I noticed the first crack on an ordinary weekday evening. Nothing dramatic happened. No raised voices. No argument. I stood alone in the kitchen, holding a glass of water. The refrigerator hummed quietly. The clock ticked with irritating precision. My wife had gone upstairs. My son was out. The quiet pressed against my chest in a way I couldn't explain. I told myself it was normal. He was 18. Teenagers needed distance. Still, I stood there longer than necessary, staring at nothing. When my son was younger, the house was louder. Questions followed me from room to room. He wanted explanations for everything. Why tools worked the way they did. Why people argued. Why rules existed. I answered quickly, directly, without hesitation. I corrected him often. I believed accuracy was kindness. Praise came less naturally to me. I assumed effort spoke for itself. That assumption hardened over time. My own father had raised me the same way. He was dependable, responsible, emotionally distant. He never missed work, never raised his voice, never explained himself either. Love, in his world, meant showing up and staying silent. I copied that model without questioning it. For years, it seemed to work. My son was polite, disciplined, independent. Teachers praised him. Neighbors admired him. I took quiet pride in that. But somewhere along the way, his eyes changed when he looked at me. They became guarded, careful. I noticed it only after it became constant. Dinner conversations shortened. He ate quickly, left early. When I asked about his day, answers came clipped, efficient. I told myself he was growing up, that this was natural separation. My wife noticed before I did. One evening, while clearing dishes, she spoke carefully. "He doesn't talk to you much anymore." I shrugged. "He's 18. She didn't argue. She just nodded. Her silence lingered longer than the comment. The real shift revealed itself during a conversation about college, applications, deadlines, plans. He wanted flexibility, options. I wanted certainty, a clear path. I told him he was being unrealistic. He told me I didn't listen. That word landed heavier than I expected. "I listen," I replied. "You hear," he said, "but you don't listen." We didn't raise our voices. We didn't insult each other. The argument ended neatly. The distance did not. After that, he stopped bringing ideas to me, stopped testing thoughts aloud. He spoke to his mother instead, or kept things to himself. I began to feel like a guest in my own house. Still, I told myself it would pass. I believed time would fix what I refused to examine. The months that followed blurred together without clear markers. Days repeated themselves with mechanical consistency. I woke early, drove to work, returned home at the same hour. Routine insulated me from questions I avoided asking. My son adjusted his schedule around mine. Not deliberately. Naturally. He came home later, left earlier. Our paths crossed briefly, like strangers sharing a hallway. When we did speak, it was functional. Logistics, house rules, money. Emotions stayed out of it. I told myself that was maturity. My wife moved carefully between us. She never took sides, never forced conversations. She had always been better with emotional terrain. She sensed shifts before they became visible. One evening, she suggested we eat together. Just the three of us. No phones. No distractions. The table felt smaller than I remembered. My son kept his shoulders slightly turned away from me. Not rude. Just distant. Conversation stalled quickly. I asked about school. He answered. She asked about friends. He smiled. That difference stung more than I expected. After dinner, she cleared plates slowly. He disappeared upstairs. I stayed seated longer than necessary. Later that night, my wife sat beside me on the couch. She spoke without accusation. "You scare him," she said quietly. I laughed before thinking. That's ridiculous. She didn't react. "You don't mean to," she continued. "But you close doors without noticing." I wanted to argue, to list sacrifices, hours worked, bills paid. Instead, I stayed silent. Her words echoed in my head for days. At work, I prided myself on mentorship. Younger employees came to me for guidance. I was patient with them, encouraging. That realization unsettled me. Why was it easier to guide strangers than my own child? The answer arrived unexpectedly through an old name on my phone. David, my former supervisor, my mentor. We hadn't spoken in years. He asked to meet for coffee. Time had bent him slightly, gray at the temples. Same steady eyes. Conversation came easily. Familiar rhythms returned. At one point, he studied me quietly. "You look tired," he said. "I'm fine." He smiled knowingly. "That's what you always said." I surprised myself by telling him about my son. Not details, just the distance. David listened without interrupting. "When did you last apologize to him?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "For what?" "For being human," he replied. I frowned. "You don't apologize unless you think you've failed." "That's the problem," he said. "Kids don't need perfect. They need present." The word lingered. Present. I had always been there physically. That counted, didn't it? David leaned back. "You lead with authority," he said. "That works at work. At home, it builds walls." I wanted to defend myself. to explain my intentions. Instead, I listened. That night, I watched my son from the doorway of his room. He sat at his desk, headphones on, focused, contained. He looked older than I remembered. I realized I didn't know what he was thinking anymore. The next morning, I attempted a small change. I asked if he wanted help with something. He looked surprised, then cautious. "I'm good," he said. No hostility, just closure. I tried again later. Invited him to drive with me. He declined politely. Each attempt felt like knocking on a locked door. Frustration crept in. Part of me resented the effort. I had done everything right, hadn't I? One evening, an argument erupted unexpectedly. I commented on his grades. Not critical. Observational. He snapped. "You don't get to care now." The room went silent. My wife froze. I felt anger rise. Then something else beneath it. Fear. "What does that mean?" I asked. He laughed bitterly. "You only show up when something's wrong." The words landed cleanly. No shouting. No exaggeration. I wanted to deny it. Instead, I heard truth. He left the room without another word. I stood there, staring at the space he'd occupied. For the first time, I wondered if silence had never meant stability at all. Maybe it had meant absence. After that night, the house felt altered in subtle ways. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt newly exposed. Silence returned, but it carried tension now. It pressed instead of soothed. I replayed his words repeatedly. "You don't get to care now." They followed me through meetings and traffic. They surfaced during quiet moments before sleep. I began noticing patterns I once ignored. How often I corrected instead of asked. How rarely I admitted uncertainty. Control had always felt like protection. Now it resembled distance. My wife watched me carefully during those days. She didn't push. She waited. One evening, she handed me an old box. Photos. Cards. School papers. "I found this in the garage," she said. "I thought you should see it." I opened it alone later that night. There were drawings from elementary school. Misspelled words. Crude stick figures. One picture showed 3 people holding hands. He had labeled them carefully. Dad. Mom. Me. I realized something painful then. I couldn't remember when I stopped being part of his drawings. The following week, my son missed curfew. Not dramatically, just late enough to matter. When he came home, I was waiting. He stopped when he saw me, braced himself. I felt the familiar urge to lecturize. I swallowed it. "Are you okay?" I asked. He blinked. Confused. "Yeah," he said slowly. I nodded. "Next time, just text." That was it. He stared at me, searching for something. Then he nodded and went upstairs. I stood there afterward, heart pounding. It felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory without a map. Later, I heard his door open. Footsteps paused near the stairs. He didn't come down, but he hadn't closed the door either. Progress felt fragile, uncertain. Days passed. Small exchanges replaced avoidance. Still careful. Still restrained. One afternoon, my wife suggested something unexpected. "Why don't you tell him about your father?" she said. I stiffened. "There's nothing to tell." She met my gaze calmly. "That's not true," she said. "You just never talk about it." She was right. My father had been present and distant simultaneously. A man of principles, not warmth. I learned early that approval came through performance, not connection. That realization unsettled me deeply. Had I repeated what I resented? That night, I knocked on my son's door. He opened it halfway. "Can we talk?" I asked. A pause. "Okay." I sat on the edge of his bed. The room felt unfamiliar. Posters, books, a version of him I didn't know. "I wasn't very good at showing things," I began. My dad wasn't either. He listened quietly. "I thought being consistent was enough," I said. "I thought rules meant safety." He didn't interrupt. I didn't realize silence could feel like rejection. My voice faltered slightly. I didn't stop it. "I'm sorry," I said. The words felt heavy, necessary. He looked down at his hands. "I didn't think you noticed me," he said quietly. That hurt more than anger ever could. "I did," I said. "I just didn't know how to say it." He nodded slowly. We sat there longer than planned. No resolution. No embrace. But something had shifted. In the weeks that followed, he tested the change. Not consciously. Naturally. He spoke more. Shared opinions. Sometimes he pushed back. I let him. Each time I resisted control, trust grew incrementally. I met David again for coffee. I apologized, I told him. He smiled. "Harder than it sounds, isn't it?" I don't know if it fixed anything. "It doesn't," he said. "It opened something." That felt accurate. At home, my wife noticed the change. "You're lighter," she said one evening. "Less certain," I corrected. She smiled. Good. As graduation approached, tension returned briefly. Decisions loomed. Expectations clashed. This time, conversations happened openly. Arguments ended without withdrawal. One night, he asked me something unexpected. "Do you ever wish you did things differently?" I answered honestly. "Yes." He nodded. "Me too," he said. That shared admission felt important. Not as closure, as understanding. For the first time, I sensed a future that wasn't defined by repair, but by presence. Graduation arrived quietly, without the relief I expected. It felt more like a checkpoint than a conclusion. The ceremony took place on a bright, indifferent morning. Families gathered with practiced excitement. I watched my son from the stands. He stood straighter than I remembered. When his name was called, he glanced toward us. Just briefly. Our eyes met. He nodded. That small gesture carried more weight than applause. Afterward, people hugged and laughed. Photos were taken. Promises were exchanged. We stood slightly apart from the crowd. Not isolated, just contained. My wife suggested lunch. He agreed. We drove together in silence that felt neutral now. No longer strained. Not yet comfortable. At the restaurant, conversation stayed practical. College, logistics, housing, costs. I noticed how carefully he watched my reactions, as if expecting withdrawal. I chose my words deliberately. "You don't have to decide everything now," I said. He looked surprised. "I know," he replied, "but it helps to hear." That night, after he went out with friends, my wife spoke quietly. "You're doing better," she said. "I don't feel better," I answered. "That's not the same thing." She was right. Better implied completion. I felt exposed, still learning. A few days later, David called, unexpectedly. "I heard you've been busy," he said. "I'm trying," I replied. "That counts." We met again, this time at his house. He lived simply. Books everywhere. Over coffee, he asked something direct. "What scares you most right now?" I thought longer than usual. "That he'll leave," I said, "and it will be my fault." David nodded. "Children always leave," he said. "The question is whether they return." That stayed with me. As summer progressed, the house changed rhythm. Boxes appeared. Lists formed. Each item packed felt symbolic. A reminder of time passing without permission. One afternoon, I found my son in the garage. He was sorting through old things. He held a baseball glove. Worn. Familiar. "You kept this," I said. "Couldn't throw it away," he replied. We stood there awkwardly. "I should have played catch more," I said. He shrugged. "I should have asked." That mutual acknowledgement felt important. Not blame, just truth. Later that week, tension returned unexpectedly. A disagreement about finances escalated. Voices rose. Old habits surfaced. I felt the urge to retreat, to end the conversation decisively. Instead, I paused. "I don't want this to turn into something else," I said. He exhaled sharply. "Me neither." We took space, then returned. Resolution didn't feel clean, but it held. That night, my wife sat beside me. "You're changing," she said softly. "I don't know who I am without the rules," I admitted. She took my hand. "You're still you," she said, "just quieter." As his departure date approached, the weight became tangible. Every meal felt intentional. Every exchange carried subtext. One evening, he asked me to drive with him. No destination specified. We drove through familiar streets, past places layered with memory. "I don't think you ever liked me much," he said suddenly. I felt the statement land heavily. "That's not true," I said. "But I get why it felt that way." He waited. "I was afraid of doing it wrong," I continued. "So I did less." He nodded. "I thought you just didn't care." "I did," I said. "I just didn't know how to show it." We drove quietly afterward. When we returned home, he stayed in the car. "I'm glad we talked," he said. So am I. The night before he left, sleep felt impossible. The house breathed differently. I heard him moving around, packing last things. I stood outside his door longer than necessary. Eventually, I knocked. He opened it fully this time. "I don't have advice," I said. "Just this." I paused. "You don't owe me anything," I continued. "But I want to be part of your life, however that looks." He studied my face carefully. "Okay," he said. "Just that." The next morning was efficient. Hugs brief. Words minimal. When he loaded the car, he hesitated. Then, he hugged me. Not tightly. Not quickly. It felt unfamiliar. Earned. As the car pulled away, the driveway looked larger. Emptier. I stood there, longer than needed. Inside, the house felt quiet again. But different. Not hollow. Not tense. Just open. The house was quiet after he left. Too quiet. A space that felt both familiar and foreign. I wandered from room to room, noticing things I hadn't before. The hallway smelled faintly of his cologne. Books lay scattered on the living room floor. His sneakers were gone from the closet. Everything remained, yet nothing was the same. I called my father that evening, not about advice or work, just to speak. We talked longer than I remembered ever speaking. Simple words, measured but sincere. The next morning, I went for a walk. Sunlight streamed over the neighborhood. Children played in yards. Neighbors exchanged greetings. The world continued, indifferent and patient. I felt myself slowly re-entering it. Over the following weeks, small routines returned. I cooked breakfast with care, read the newspaper slowly, tended the garden with intention. Evenings were quiet, but not heavy. The absence of my son was tangible, but it no longer felt like a wound. I reached out to him sporadically. Texts, short calls. He responded in his own time, not always immediately, but he replied. One night, I went through old photographs. They captured fleeting smiles and forgotten moments. I realized I hadn't appreciated the time I had before. Now, each memory felt precious. Every photograph a reminder of what matters. Months later, the seasons shifted. Leaves turned golden, then fell. The air cooled. Life moved forward with quiet inevitability. During one Sunday dinner, he visited. No luggage, no urgency, just him. We talked over dinner, laughing occasionally, disagreeing thoughtfully. No arguments escalated. No distance reopened. I watched him leave that night. The porch light illuminated the driveway. His figure disappeared into the street, but the connection remained. I sat quietly afterward, feeling the house differently. No longer empty. No longer silent. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fully reconciled. It was something better. Presence. Connection. Trust rebuilt slowly, deliberately. In the weeks that followed, I checked in more often. He shared stories from college, experiences I would have missed. I listened without judgment. I offered advice only when asked. I realized I had learned patience, not just for him, but for myself. That understanding, rather than control, nurtured growth. One evening, alone in the garden, I whispered softly to the night, "Thank you for giving me a second chance." The future remained uncertain. Life always does. But I felt steady, grounded, ready. I had discovered that relationships require presence, even in absence. That connection isn't constant. It must be nurtured. And that love, quiet and persistent, can endure the changes life imposes. We aren't perfect. We don't have to be. We just have to be willing to try. And in that willingness, I found hope. Hope that time, though fleeting, can still be meaningful. I closed the window, listened to the hum of the neighborhood, and smiled softly. Life moves forward, and we move with it.